So, Jeff raised the point of companies are dropping degree requirements, right? And often when we think about, what is skills-based hiring, it's when you drop degree requirements and you stop relying on like education. Now, in reality, there are a lot of jobs that still require education. And even for those that don't, that's still just like a very small piece of the puzzle. And so we kind of work with companies to say, well, what can you do next? What's your next step? So yes, drop degree requirements where you don't need them, right? Obviously, there'll still be places where you do, but that doesn't mean you can't practice skills-based hiring in those places as well, right? And so that's kind of one thing that we coach companies to do. The other piece is to rely less on like years of work experience. And, to your example that you just shared, Ben, like there's a way to like assess those skills without just saying, this person has experience doing X. Well, let's actually see. In your example, they actually gave you output and they showed you the application of their skills, right? And so that was the way that you assessed them versus them just saying, yeah, I do this on the side or I've done this for 3 years, right? The reason why we coach people to move away from that is because like all the empirical research on selection science shows that work experience is not predictive of post-hire job performance, right? And so we know that skills are more predictive. You just have to figure out how to assess them and measure them properly. So that's like piece one, yes, drop degree requirements where you can. Piece two, stop relying on work experience, which is a really big mental shift for a lot of people. Like they're deeply ingrained in the first question, tell me about your experience or walk me through your resume. Now, those questions we still, we're not telling people not to ask those because they are just in general kind of like still like a somewhat structured way to build rapport in an interview. Interviews are still real conversations between humans. But beyond that, how can we then design really the hiring process, which really comes down to, interviews, whether they are coding or work sample interviews or more traditional, like, face-to-face, virtual, whatever type interviews. How can we create the best assessment possible to make sure that the decisions we're making are based on the candidate's proficiency of skills? And so we work a lot with companies to figure out how to do that piece. There's kind of two different types of skills as well. Like when you're talking about a lot of the skills that Harash mentioned earlier, like AI, big data, et cetera, those are more technical skills. And so that's where, tech already is doing a great job of work samples and of coding interviews relative to most other positions and places in the organization. That type of work sample, again, empirical research shows is a stronger predictor of job performance than if you were to just ask someone about their experience with X. So when you can use those coding type exercises to assess those technical skills, like do it. I think the other piece of the puzzle, especially when you're talking about finding tech talent at a global scale, is thinking about the other, some soft skills is a pretty common like term, but soft skills that someone needs to do the job. And just because they need technical skills doesn't mean they don't need any soft skills, right? And so we think really carefully about, how do we narrow down a very specific list of soft skills? Often like adaptability or flexibility is a huge one these days. Everyone wants someone who can, work in a dynamic environment and be adaptable. Another one we see a lot is learning agility. We want someone that can learn quickly, especially with all of these changes that are happening so quickly. And so then the piece comes, and this is very like specific to applying skills-based hiring, is that how can we design our interviews to assess those skills? And to do so, we have kind of a number of different practices, but really what it boils down to is having like a set of interview questions ahead of time that you're going to ask all candidates. Questions should be either behavioral or situational in nature. So behavioral questions, most people are familiar with. Tell me about a time you did X, right? And situational questions are more hypothetical. They'll say, hey, imagine you were in this particular scenario. You still want to make it you want to embed the context in the job and the company. So you want to make it very specific. We see a lot of, if you like Google online, how do I assess like conflict management? You often get the question like, tell me about a time you had a conflict with someone. That's so broad and so generic. Like, how can we make that? Imagine you were, working with X colleague on X project that had X constraints. And so really kind of contextualize the questions, but make sure they're assessing like that particular skill. And then, so, one of those two archetypes, behavioral or situational. And then the next piece, and from my point of view is the most important piece, is having some kind of answer guide in terms of understanding what you're looking for. And when you're hiring with a panel, this is so important because it's basically how you're operationalizing your skill. So what adaptability means to one person might be different to someone else. But when you have a question that assesses adaptability, an answer guide where you know what you're looking for, then what you can do is you can actually rate that on like a numeric scale, behavior anchored rating scale, whatever you like. If you have multiple people in the interview, you get multiple people to do that. You average those skills, you have a proficiency score on that candidate for that skill. Right. And then at the end of the day, when you bring all three candidates through that same process, you can go back to your skills database you just built from your interviews and compare candidates based on skills. So really what we do there is a blend of like structured interviewing best practices, but with a focus on skills-based hiring.
Do I get the mic drop moment? Like hearing that was a master class on skills-based hiring and all that. These are a few short minutes. That was incredible, truly. I was going to ask follow up, but I was going to challenge you on one thing. And then you brought up the behavior anchored rating scales. Oh, I heard that from my own heart. Right. Talking about using that to really, for all of you out there that don't speak nerd, that means exactly what Alycia just said. Have a set of behaviors you're looking for or key answers you're looking for that are good, not so good, and terrible, and use that to sort of evaluate how the answers come in. So really laying those things out. For all of you out there, I know someone's hearing you talk or heard you say that, Alycia, and is thinking, yeah, but I've got a high manager that won't drop the degree requirements. I was going to ask a follow-up there, but you just laid out everything they need to do to take back to them to say, here's a different alternative. And the secret answer for all of you that are like, yeah, they should push back. The secret word is pilot. Okay. Just say, I want to pilot this. I want to try it out. We'll see what happens, because usually that's a way to get in a good idea that they may not be bought in on yet and let you try it out in that environment there.
Yeah, that's exactly what we say. I'll add one more thing, Ben, too, because this question came up last week and I was like, there's so many people that probably need to hear this as well. I was speaking with someone again about skills-based hiring their company. And she's like, and this is an HR professional. She's like, number one, hiring managers don't want to hear from HR to stop focusing on things that they've been focusing on forever, especially when they have examples of, hey, it's worked in the past for me, right? I've hired this great person, etc. So like, how do I tell them to stop focusing on it? And then, the other piece is also like, we're human beings. We rely on our mental shortcuts. And so to make decisions, like that's just how we optimize for efficiency, right? And so ultimately, like, sat there and thought about it for a moment. I'm like, I think what we really coach people on is what do you start doing versus what do you stop doing? When you actually just bring in new frameworks, like focus more on what can we start versus like stop doing X, Y, and Z. And it actually just brings kind of a whole new like frame around the problem. And you don't even have to, you don't even have to introduce or have a discussion around let's stop doing X, Y, and Z because X, Y, and Z. They can just, they'll to some extent they're going to be relying on that information anyways, but what can we introduce as a new practice and not even try and have you stop doing things, because that's really hard. Behavior change is really hard.